The Tenacity floated silently through the void of space, a massive generation ship carrying the last remnants of humanity toward a distant star. The Earth was lost, left behind centuries ago, consumed by some unknown cataclysm that had forced the desperate launching of the ship as a final effort to preserve the species. For generations, the inhabitants of the Tenacity had lived out their lives within the confines of the great ship, each successive crew dutifully maintaining systems and continuing the voyage, driven by the singular purpose of reaching their destination, the Goldilocks planet orbiting Tau Ceti, 12 light-years from Sol. A planet that probes had shown held the promise of a new home for humanity. Captain Meera Singh stood on the bridge, gazing out at the approaching planet on the viewscreen, hardly able to believe they had finally made it after over 300 years of travel. She represented the 12th generation born aboard the Tenacity. No living soul remembered the Earth except through old video archives. This ship had been their entire universe. Preparing for orbital insertion, Captain Lieutenant Zion reported from the con. All systems nominal. Very good, Meera replied. Once we're in a stable orbit, begin scanning the surface. I want a full assessment of the landing site and surrounding. She was cut off by a sudden exclamation from the comms officer. Captain, I'm picking up a transmission from the surface. It's on old Earth frequencies and using ancient encryption protocols. Meera furrowed her brow in confusion. What? That's impossible. Put it on audio. The voice that came through the bridge speakers spoke in an accent none of them had ever heard outside of historical archives. Unidentified vessel, this is Tau Ceti Colony Alpha. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Meera and her crew stared at each other in stunned silence for a long moment. Finally, she signaled the comm officer and spoke. This is Captain Meera Singh of the Terran generation ship Tenacity out of Sol. We're not expecting to find anyone here. When did you establish this colony? We first landed 47 years ago, Captain Singh, the voice replied, sounding both curious and cautious. Sol's system has been uninhabited for over 2 centuries, since the calamity forced the evacuation. I must say, we thought we were the last of humanity. It's a shock to encounter another ship, especially a generation ship. We haven't used that technology in a long time. Meera shared a look of complete bewilderment with her exec. None of this made any sense. If Earth had been evacuated centuries ago, how had the Tau Ceti colony been established only 47 years prior? And without generation ship technology? We have a great deal to discuss, Meera said finally. With your permission, I'd like to send a delegation to the surface to meet with your leadership, and to understand what exactly happened to Earth, and how you came to be here. Of course, Captain. We're transmitting landing coordinates to you now. I'm sure our president will be fascinated to learn your story, as we are to learn about your journey. Welcome to Tau Ceti, the first new home of humanity. As the transmission ended, Meera collapsed back into her chair, mind reeling. After centuries of isolation, believing they were the last of their kind, they had arrived only to find a thriving human civilization already here, one that apparently had surpassed them technologically long ago. She had a feeling that after today, nothing would ever be the same. The crew of the Tenacity had fulfilled their mission, but their place in this new world remained very uncertain. They were ancient relics of a past these colonists likely only remembered from history books. But one thing was clear: the human drive to survive, to push forward and seek out new frontiers, had not been limited to their little ship. Somehow, against all odds, humanity had found another way. The shuttle glided through the clouds, the rocky, barren surface of the planet transforming into lush green as they descended into the atmosphere. Meera leaned forward in her seat, transfixed by the scene outside the viewport. Forests of towering alien conifers stretched as far as the eye could see, interspersed with vast prairies of waving lavender-hued grasses. Pristine lakes and rivers wound their way through the landscape, glittering in the light of the binary suns hanging in the rose-tinted sky. And there, nestled in a picturesque valley, lay the Tau Ceti colony. Gleaming silver towers rose elegantly from the forest, connected by graceful arcing sky bridges. Smaller structures dotted the lush fields along the outskirts, homes and farms, Meera presumed. It was like something out of a fairy tale. As the shuttle settled onto the landing pad, Meera turned to her small delegation, her exec, CDR, Rian Keller, and 2 of her most senior and experienced officers, LT, CDR, Asha Jindal and LT, Talia Kairos. I don't think anything could have prepared me for this moment, Mira said, shaking her head in lingering disbelief. Everything we thought we knew about the fate of humanity has been turned on its head. Rian nodded gravely. It's clear they've been here far longer than they claim, and are far more advanced. The question is why they're hiding the truth. We need to tread carefully, Asha put in. We're the outsiders here, relics from their ancient past. Until we know more, diplomacy needs to be the priority. Talia glanced out the viewport at the assembled welcome delegation waiting for them on the pad and smirked. Well, putting on a smile and pretending everything is fine is what we command staff do best, right? Should be a piece of cake. Mira couldn't help but chuckle, despite the tight knot of anxiety in her gut. Leave it to Talia to find the humor in even a moment like this. Releasing a slow breath, Mira rose, straightening her jacket and checking that her comm badge was prominently displayed. All right, let's do this. Time to go smile and shake hands and hopefully get some damn answers about what happened to our species, and what our place is in this brave new world we found. The 4 officers walked across the flight deck and down the extended ramp, blinking in the bright alien sunlight as they emerged onto the landing pad. The scenery was even more breathtaking up close, the earthy smell of the forests and the gentle breeze carrying a potpourri of floral scents. But Mira only had eyes for the delegation awaiting them. About a dozen men and women stood in a loose semicircle, dressed in crisp uniforms with an unfamiliar insignia on the breast. A tall man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard stepped forward, his bearing screaming military. He raised his hand in an old Earth salute that Mira recognized from historical vids. Captain Singh, on behalf of President Hyun, welcome to Tau Ceti Colony Alpha. I'm General Ivers, commander of the Colony Defense Forces. Mira returned the salute crisply, falling back on ingrained protocols in the face of so many unknowns. Thank you, General. It's an honor to be here. Although I must admit your existence comes as quite a shock to us. We had no idea that Earth survived the cataclysm, let alone that humanity had spread to the stars. She let the unspoken question hang. Ivers inclined his head, his expression difficult to read. Of course you must have a great many questions. All will be explained in time. But where are my manners? You've had a long journey. Please come inside. The President is eager to meet you. He gestured toward a waiting ground transport at the end of the pad. Mira hesitated only a moment before nodding to her people and allowing Ivers to guide them forward. Her every instinct screamed that something wasn't right here, but they were playing at a severe disadvantage. Their only choice was to play along until they could ferret out the truth. The city was like something out of a fever dream as the transport wound its way through the elegant towers and tree-lined promenades. Pedestrians strolled along the sidewalks and patronized sidewalk cafes, dressed in fashions that looked both utterly alien and strangely familiar to Mira's eyes. Sleek, colorful vehicles hummed along the roads, some even taking flight to zoom between the towers. It was a vision of the utopian future the first generation aboard the Tenacity had always dreamed of building. Mira startled as Asha leaned in close to murmur in her ear, "Is it just me, or does this all seem a little too perfect?" Mira grimaced, keeping her voice low. "My thoughts exactly. No colony is this idyllic after only 47 years, no matter how advanced their technology. There's something they're not telling us." The transport slowed to a stop in front of the largest tower yet, a graceful spire that seemed to brush the wispy clouds above. General Ivers escorted them inside and into a lavish atrium with soaring ceilings and artistic holographic displays. After a short elevator ride, they emerged into a plush executive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A petite Asian woman with a sleek bob haircut rose from behind the large desk, a practiced diplomatic smile on her face. "Captain Singh, it's a pleasure. I'm President Milan Hyun. Welcome to New Haven." She gestured for them to take seats in the armchairs arranged around the office. New Haven, Mira questioned as she sat down. "I thought this was Tau Ceti Colony Alpha." Hyun waved a hand dismissively. "A temporary designation during the early years. We renamed the planet as soon as the colony was properly established." She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "But I'm sure you're bursting with more pressing questions. It must have been quite a shock to find us here after expecting an uninhabited world." Mira nodded, choosing her words carefully. "To say the least, we'd been led to believe the Earth was lost and we were the last of humanity. But you say your people evacuated centuries ago. How is it you've only been here for 47 years? Hyun and Ivers exchanged a brief look. "Ah, forgive me, Captain. I can see how that would be confusing," Hyun said smoothly. "In truth, it has been several centuries since we left Earth, but our initial colonies were established elsewhere. Tau Ceti was only recently selected for colonization as we expanded. The 47 years refers to this settlement specifically." Mira frowned. It was a reasonable explanation, but her gut still nagged at her that something was off. If they'd been traveling and colonizing for centuries, why was there no record of them? Surely the Tenacity would have picked up communications chatter or residual warp signatures. And how had they traveled so quickly without ships like the Tenacity? Seeming to pick up on her skepticism, Hyun continued, "You have to understand, Captain Singh, when we learned of the cataclysm that befell Earth, we feared the worst. That we were all that was left of humanity. Over the centuries, we poured our resources into technological advancement and expansion to ensure our survival and spread humanity to as many worlds as possible." She spread her hands. "We never dreamed we would encounter other surviving humans, let alone from a generation ship launched centuries after we'd already left. You can imagine our surprise when your ship appeared on our sensors." "And you ours," Mira replied evenly. "Though I suspect your surprise was somewhat less, given your advanced technology. Speaking of which, we couldn't help but notice during our approach that your world seems free of satellites, stations or orbital infrastructure of any kind. For a colony capable of detecting and hailing an incoming ship light minutes out." She let the implication hang. Hyun smiled thinly, but there was a new watchfulness in her eyes. "Our technology has advanced in ways I'm certain would be nearly incomprehensible to you, Captain. But that's a discussion for another time. You and your crew must be eager to get to know this world that is to become your new home. Please take some time to rest and acclimate yourselves. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss the integration of your people into the colony." It wasn't a request. Mira exchanged looks with Rian and Asha, seeing her own unease reflected back at her. But again, what choice did they have? Rising smoothly to her feet, Mira inclined her head respectfully to Hyun. "Of course. We look forward to further discussing the many ways our two branches of humanity may be able to help one another. Until tomorrow, Madame President." As Ivers showed them out, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into a lion's den. There was some secret here, something momentous, and she needed to find out what it was. Over the next 2 weeks, the crew of the Tenacity attempted to settle into their strange new circumstances in New Haven. The colonists were unfailingly polite and welcoming, giving them comfortable quarters and access to most public spaces in the city. But there was a reserve to their interactions, a subtle distance telegraphing that the Tenacity crew would always be outsiders. Mira pushed for more information in her daily meetings with President Hyun, but was stonewalled at every turn. No, they couldn't share the advanced technology that allowed them to travel between stars so quickly and detect ships at range. No, she couldn't speak to any of the Tau Ceti scientists about comparative stellar records to determine exactly when the colony ships had left Earth. Every inquiry was met with a polite but firm denial, always citing the need for the Tenacity crew to focus on integration into the colony first. It was maddening. Rian and Asha attempted to gain information via different avenues, subtly querying the colonists they interacted with. But it quickly became apparent that the citizens either genuinely didn't know the answers or had been coached on what topics were forbidden to discuss with the newcomers. Though they remained as pleasant as ever, Mira could sense the crew's frustration and unease growing by the day. Then came the night 2 weeks after their arrival when everything changed. Mira was working late in the quarters she'd been assigned, poring over the limited historical records the colonists had provided, when her comm beeped. Asha's voice came through, pitched low and urgent. "Captain, you need to come to my quarters right away. There's something you have to see." Mira immediately saved her work and hurried the few blocks to the apartment tower where the senior staff had been housed. Asha ushered her inside, where Rian and Talia were already waiting, their faces grim. In the center of the room, a holo display showed an official-looking document covered in densely packed text. "What am I looking at?" Mira asked tersely. Asha tapped the display, enlarging a section. "Talia and I finally managed to gain access to the colony's public data network. We've been combing through the records, trying to find anything that might give us a clue about the truth of this place. And we found this." Mira peered at the text, her eyes widening as she took in the words. It appeared to be some kind of incident report, dated only 8 years previously. It made reference to something called the Salvation Protocol and a cataclysmic event that had threatened the entire colony. But most ominously, it mentioned the recent arrival of refugees from a place called Nova Terra. "I don't understand," Mira said slowly. "I thought this colony was established 47 years ago, and if they recently took in refugees, why not mention it to us? We're all human, we could have offered to assist." She broke off, a terrible suspicion crystallizing in her mind. Asha nodded grimly, seemingly having come to the same conclusion. "Captain, I don't think this is a lost human colony," Asha said softly. "I think it's something else entirely. Something that's been here a lot longer than 47 years. And I think the Novaterran refugees are us." Mira sank into a chair, her mind spinning. It seemed impossible, and yet, it would explain so much. The inconsistencies in the colony's history. The cagey attitude of the leadership toward the Tenacity crew's origins. The almost impossible leaps in their technology compared to a ship that had been traveling for over 300 years. "My God," Mira breathed. "They're not human at all, are they? They're some kind of alien species that found Earth's records of Tau Ceti after we'd already launched, and set up this colony as, what, a place to study us? Manipulate us? Or contain us?" Rian put in darkly. "Think about it, a generation ship full of humans arriving from a planet they thought was dead. With knowledge of a past these aliens probably don't want getting out. What better way to control that threat than to shuffle us into their own Potemkin village of a colony, keep a close eye on us and make sure we integrate into their narrative?" Talia nodded, her jaw tight. Integration. That word keeps coming up. But what if it doesn't mean joining their society? What if it means assimilation? Studying us and then slowly making us disappear? A heavy silence descended on the room as they all grappled with the horrifying implications. Mira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settling over her like a mantle. "Okay, we need more information, but we have to assume the worst." Ria and Asha, quietly gather the senior staff and brief them on what we've discovered. Talia, keep digging into those records, see if you can find anything else that might shed light on what these aliens actually want from us. Her expression turned fierce, a fire kindling in her eyes. "We've spent 300 years fighting for the survival of our species. We won't let that fight end here on a lie. One way or another, we're going to get the truth. And if necessary, we'll find a way to escape and warn the Tenacity." Over the next several days, Mira and her inner circle worked tirelessly to learn the secrets of New Haven. Talia managed to decrypt more files that painted a chilling picture, references to Terran specimens and long-term viability studies. There was no longer any doubt in their minds that the colony was nothing more than a gilded cage. Asha quietly reached out to crew members with scientific and technical backgrounds, tasking them to surreptitiously gather data on the aliens' technology and infrastructure. If it came down to it, they needed to be able to make a run for the Tenacity and get the ship back into space. Meanwhile, Mira continued her meetings with President Hyun, maintaining a facade of grateful cooperation while subtly pressing for more information on the history of the colony and the technological advances that allowed them to travel the stars. Hyun remained evasive, but Mira could sense the president's growing unease with her questioning. The aliens had clearly expected the Tenacity crew to be so overjoyed to find fellow humans that they would simply accept the colony's hospitality without looking too closely at the inconsistencies. Mira's refusal to follow that script was putting Hyun on edge, and the captain knew it was only a matter of time before the president stopped playing nice. They needed to act soon before the aliens decided the Tenacity crew was more trouble than they were worth. The final piece of the puzzle came from a wholly unexpected source. Rian had struck up a seemingly casual friendship with one of the maintenance workers who tended the hydroponics gardens. Over shared meals and amiable conversation, the man began to let little things slip. His confusion over why the nutrient baths used such complex compounds for simple human crops, his bemusement at the antique equipment the Tenacity crew used. And then came the day he casually mentioned that his grandparents used to tell stories of the early days of the colony when the first humans arrived. But that would have been well over a century ago. Armed with this final confirmation, Mira made the decision. They couldn't wait any longer. The Tenacity crew had to escape now, while they still could. On a prearranged signal, teams of crew members staged diversions across the colony. Small fires, malfunctioning machinery, anything to draw the aliens' attention. In the chaos, Mira and her senior staff made their break, racing for the shuttle pad where a craft sat prepped and ready. They were halfway across the pad when alarms began to sound and armed alien security forces poured out of the nearby buildings. Mira and the others sprinted for the shuttle ramp, energy weapons fire sizzling past them. "Go, go," Mira shouted, slamming her hand on the ramp controls as the last of her people leaped inside. The ramp sealed and the engines roared to life, the shuttle lifting off just as the aliens reached the pad. In the passenger bay, the crew of the Tenacity held on grimly as the small craft shuddered and wove, evading the colony's defenses. Mira thumbed the comms, hailing the massive generation ship waiting silently in orbit. "Tenacity, this is Captain Singh, requesting emergency docking clearance. Repeat, requesting emergency docking clearance." There was a tense pause, then a voice crackled over the speakers. "Clearance granted, Captain. Welcome home." As the shuttle slipped into the Tenacity's cavernous landing bay, Mira felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. They had escaped the gilded cage of New Haven and learned the horrible truth that they were not the last of humanity, but rather the first to be preyed upon by a calculating alien intelligence. Mira knew their fight was far from over. The aliens would come for them again, seeking to recapture their specimens, and out there in the stars, other unsuspecting human colonies or ships might be falling into the same trap. But the Tenacity was more than just a ship. It was a community, a legacy, and Mira would be damned if she let that light be snuffed out by an alien lie. As the crew disembarked into the familiar hum and bustle of their home, Mira gazed out the viewport at the stars, her eyes hard with determination. "This isn't over," she murmured, a vow to herself and to all the generations who had come before. "We'll find a way to warn the others, to make sure humanity survives, no matter what the universe throws at us. The Tenacity will live up to her name."